Hi, I am going to talk about the origin and evolution of cells and how life found its way against all the odds. The story of life began 4.5 billion years ago in a world that was full of chaos. There were no cells, no life, no order, just energy, raw elements, and violent beginnings. But somehow that chaos gave rise to chemistry. Chemistry becomes structures. Structures organized to form life, and life evolved into incredible diversity of organisms we see around us today, including you and me. Welcome to the story of cellular evolution. Before we begin, let me put the timeline of evolution into perspective. Just think for a moment. Where were you 1 year ago? Can you remember what happened on this exact date 1 year before? What were your goals back then? What were you excited about? What were you afraid of? Maybe some of those things have changed, maybe some haven't. But you probably still remember the feel of that time. Now let's add a zero to that. 10 years ago. What were you doing in the same month 10 years back? Were you still in school? What was life like then? Can you remember who your friends were? For most of the people, memories get a bit blurry after that. Now let's go back 100 years. None of us were alive then, but think about the world at that time. There were no mobile phones, no internet, and very few automobiles. Your hometown may not even have electricity everywhere. Communication was slow and people wrote letters. Your great-grandparents lived in a completely different world. Let's add another zero, 1000 years ago. That's deep into history. No electricity and no science classrooms. We were lived by firelight and telling stories under the stars. The idea of cell would have been unthinkable back then. 10,000 years ago, we were still hunters and gatherers. Human beings were just beginning to learn how to farm, starting to form small community and change their relationship with the nature. 100,000 years ago, humans were still wandering across the continents. We were shaping tools from stone, learning fire, and starting to form earliest expressions of language and culture. 1 million years ago, there were no modern humans. Our ancestors looked different and they lived entirely off the land. Their minds were even not wired to abstract thinking or art or science. 10 million years ago, the world belongs to ancient mammals. There were just dense forests, evolving creatures, and changing vegetations. 100 million years ago, dinosaurs dominated the earth. Birds had just begun to take flight, flowers were starting to bloom, and mammals were quietly evolving in the shadows of dinosaurs. It was a very different planet. 1 billion years ago, life was mostly microscopic. No plants, no animals, cells were floating in the ocean and slowly learning to live together. Now go back even further, 4.54 billion years ago. That's when Earth itself was forming. There was no oceans, no air, or no life. Earth was boiling, unstable and violent. And there was no calm and no peace. Only raw energy and untermed elements. And yet, from that chaos, the building blocks of life were slowly taking shape. Simple molecules began to form, amino acids, sugars, fatty acids and nucleotides. They didn't know what they were building towards. They weren't alive. They were just reacting, colliding and rearranging. But over time, the molecules started to organize. Some began to store information. Some could catalyze reaction. Others could form membrane. Structures become stable. Molecules become self-replicating. Patterns emerged. The first protocells formed with the ability to survive, to reproduce and eventually to evolve. The incredible story of life began about 4.54 billion years ago when chaos turned into chemistry. Chemistry gave rise to structures, structures turned into life, and life evolved into a vast variety of organisms. So when we talk about cellular evolution, we are not just talking about cells. We are talking about a few molecules, some sunlight, and a lot of time leading to the formation of order from disorder, life from non-life, and how your cell today carry the same ancient story within them. So let's see the timeline of cellular evolution. Earth was originated about 4.5 billion years ago, and the prebiotic organics in the ancient oceans formed 4.1 billion years ago. RNA world existed about 3.9 billion years ago, and the protocells formed about 3.8 billion years ago, and first prokaryotic cell made its appearance around 3.5 billion years ago. Eukaryotes emerged 2.2 billion years ago, and the multicellular organism evolved around 1.5 billion years ago, and we, Homo sapiens, evolved about 0.0003 billion years ago. And let's dive into the details of each of these major events. Origin of Earth. After our Sun formed, leftover dust and gas began to clump together to form planets, including Earth. In early days, Earth was extremely hot with constant volcanic eruptions and a harsh toxic atmosphere. Eventually, the planet cooled just enough to allow water vapor to condense and form oceans, and these oceans become the cradle for life. The early atmosphere of Earth was made up of gases like methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor. There was no oxygen. Lightning, UV radiations, and volcanic activity provided constant energy to drive random chemical reactions among these chemicals. This created a primordial soup, a mix of simple molecules that eventually become the building blocks of life. To test this idea, Stanley Miller and Harold Urey set up an experiment that simulated early Earth conditions. They passed an electric spark through a mixture of gases thought to present in the early Earth atmosphere. After a week, they found that amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, had formed. And they showed that simple organic molecules could form naturally under right conditions. In addition to amino acids, conditions on early Earth may also lead to the formation of sugars, fatty acids, and nucleic acid. These simple molecules again subjected to random reaction to form more complex structures. RNA world. Simple organic molecules eventually link with each other to form larger molecules. Amino acids link each other to form peptides. Nucleotide polymerize to form DNA and RNA. Out of this, RNA, ribonucleic acid, is believed to be the first molecule to show the property of life due to its unique properties. RNA is capable of storing genetic information like DNA and catalyze chemical reaction like protein. Even today, the process of protein synthesis, that is making protein in the cell, is catalyzed by RNA present in the ribosome. Further, some RNA molecules shown to have the ability to self-replicate. Hence, we believe that life began with the RNA. RNA molecule didn't float around alone forever. Fatty molecule, acid molecule, with a naturally formed lipid vesicle surrounded the RNA molecule and forming a protocell. Inside these tiny bubbles, RNA could replicate and catalyze the reaction more efficiently. They had boundaries, energy gradients, and protection from the outside world. Over the time, they become more stable and efficient. Eventually, protocells started to grow, divide, and pass on their RNA molecule to their offsprings. As complexity increases, RNA alone wasn't enough. Proteins evolved, bringing more diversity and powerful catalytic function. DNA evolved, offering better long-term storage of information. This shift gave rise to the modern central dogma of molecular biology. DNA passed information to RNA and RNA passed information to protein. Over millions of years, these protocells become more organized and efficient and gave rise to first prokaryotic cell. They were simple in structure. It has a cell membrane that separates the internal environment from the outside, cytoplasm a jelly-like interior full of molecules, DNA to carry genetic information, ribosome to make protein, and often it has a cell wall for protection. The early prokaryotes were anaerobic, live without oxygen in an oxygen-poor atmosphere of Earth. Later, cyanobacteria evolved with the ability to perform photosynthesis. They use sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to produce glucose and oxygen. This oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere over time, leading to the great oxygenation event. Eventually, some prokaryotes evolved the ability to use that oxygen to break down glucose. That process was far more energy efficient than the anaerobic pathway. This gave them an edge and set stage for even more complex life. Prokaryotic life ruled the earth for over billions of years. But around 2 billion years ago, something revolutionary happened. A new kind of cell emerged, the eukaryotic cell. Unlike prokaryote, eukaryotic cells are more complex and have nucleus and cell organelle. Some of these organelles in eukaryote were once free-living prokaryotes. And it happens by endosymbiosis, when a large ancestral prokaryotic cell engulfed a aerobic bacteria. Instead of digesting it, it started to have a symbiotic relationship with that bacteria. This endosymbiotic bacteria produce extra energy for the host. Over the time, the relationship becomes permanent and the engulfed bacteria evolved into mitochondria. So the mitochondria we have is not really a part of us always. They were once a free living bacteria. It is like a guest who never left but now pay all your energy bills. In plant ancestors, another event occurred. It engulfed a photosynthetic bacteria which become chloroplasts. Both mitochondria and chloroplasts still carry their own DNA similar to the bacteria and they reproduce independently inside our cell. That's strong evidence for the prokaryotic origin of mitochondria and chloroplasts. Eukaryotic cells are foundation for all complex life with incredible diversity. For millions of years, all the life on earth was unicellular, just a single cell floating, dividing and surviving on their own. But about 1.5 billion years ago, something changed. Certain eukaryotic cells began to live in groups. Over time, these groups become multicellular organisms with specialized cells. Early multicellular organisms lived in water and were very simple, soft-bodied with just few types of cells to perform basic functions like movement, feeding and reproduction. Over time, natural selection favored the organisms that could move faster, sense their surrounding, process nutrients better and reproduce more successfully. This led to gradual increase in complexity. It allowed evolution to explore in size, complexity and diversity to a new whole level scale. For a few cells working together, it became mushrooms, trees, dinosaurs and eventually us. Once multicellularity took hold, life exploded into new forms. Fungi with the networks and spores, plants with the roots and leaves, animals with the muscles and nerves. Over millions of years, this early multicellular organism evolved into fish, which dominated the ocean. Evolution of fish sequentially leads to amphibians, then to reptiles, then to birds and eventually mammals. All plants trace their ancestry to the green algae, which are aquatic photosynthetic organisms. Around 500 million years ago, some green algae adapted to survive near the edges of freshwater bodies. Over time, they evolved structures that allowed them to survive on land. As plants colonized land, they began to produce oxygen through photosynthesis. They shaping the ecosystem and providing food and habitat for evolving animals. Without plant evolution, complex animal life couldn't have followed, especially in land. Mammals remained small for millions of years until the extinction of dinosaurs, and they diversified into many forms after that. One branch of mammals gave rise to primates, animals with the grasping hands, large brains and forward-facing eyes. Within primates, a group called hominids emerged around 6 million years ago in Africa. This early human began to walk upright, use tools, develop complex social behavior, communicate and eventually use language. Homo sapiens, our species, appeared around 300,000 years ago. From there, culture, technology and civilization began to evolve, not only biologically, but also intellectually. That brings us to the end of an exciting journey that began in the boiling chaos of early Earth, with a simple molecule floating in an ancient ocean and leads to a vibrant world we see today. That's the beauty of biology. It connects the tiniest molecule to the largest question. And it all begins with a cell. From the first protocell came prokaryotes, eukaryotes, and eventually multicellular life. Some took roots as plants, shaping the land and atmosphere. Others become animals, evolving into forms as diverse as insects, birds, and whales. And eventually, one species that could look back and ask, where did we come from? That species is us. As we marvel the brilliance of life, we also live in the time of deep concern. Climate change, pollution, and reckless release of chemicals are threatening the balance of ecosystems. Yet, here is something we must remember. Life has seen far worse. It has survived a meteor impact, ice ages, mass extinction, and the most extreme environments imaginable. Life was born from chaos, and it adapted, endured, and evolved. If we disappear, it may be tragic for our species, but life will go on. It may take new forms. It may begin again from the smallest microorganism, but it will continue because life doesn't need us. We need life. So when we study the origin and evolution of cells, we are not just learning about past, we are finding our place in the story and how fragile that place really is. And no matter how uncertain the future feels, remember, life will always find its way. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you so much.